pretty good, and they vanished into thin air. So I found another one, not too long, but it gives you a pretty good overview of crimping butt connectors on. Right? So this is sometimes the way you have to do it. Soldering is not always the way you go. If you buy a fuel pump from General Motors, a lot of times it'll come with a pigtail, and they give you butt connectors to crimp them on and then use heat shrink on them to collapse them. And he's going to show you those type. So if you do them correctly, these can be perfectly good connectors, connections. So don't be afraid of this, but I'll give you an example. I just redid the interior on my 87 Monte Carlo Super Sport, and I had the roof replaced back in like 1993. So I had to put a dome light in it. So when I went to redo it, I did my headliner in Alcantara, and I had pulled everything apart, and I discovered all my crimp connectors that I made when I was like 23 years old. And I said, I'm now going to take all my immature wiring out and replace it with adult wiring. And I soldered all those connections that were crimp connected. So having a crimp connection is a point of corrosion that can build. So it's still a way that you will do things. And there's times I'll use this method. It all depends what it is I'm doing. And it'll be after this little moment here. And it'll come. It's because I'm using a downloaded version of my Prezi. It didn't seem to want me to use it for my casting. So it should be showing up here any second, any moment. There it comes. I'm going to try to edit that delay out, so see what happens.
How to crimp butt electrical connections with heat shrink. So here's a typical set that you may buy. It's got the different colors, different sizes, different types of connections. And the key of making a good connection is using the right size connector with the right size wire. With this set, it's actually giving you a chart of the different sizes. The colors are usually standardized. Yellow is usually gauge 10 to 12. Blue is usually gauge 16 to 14. And red is 22 to 16. Ironically, the bigger the gauge, the smaller the wire. America typically uses this system, but other places may use millimeter squared. So we have here a 1.5 millimeter square wire. So we need this connection here. We'll use a butt connection. So that's about a 16, so they're about equivalent. Here's a typical example of a connector with heat shrink tubing on either side. So basically you'll heat this up and it will seal the wiring together. So the only tool you really need is a crimping tool like this. So at this end, you got the wire stripper. So pick the right size, strip the wire out. And this end is a crimping side. Again, pick the right size to do the crimping. Now you could get a bit more elaborate with a ratcheted crimper. Again, different sizes, all standardized.
Awesome tool. You want to buy one.
So let's get started. What we want to do is get your wire stripper and take off about 1/4 inch. If you can see this, it's about halfway through the connector. So about that much. So on the wire stripper end, select 1.5, 1/4 inch, clamp down and pull away.
It helps to twist it around to cut the casing a little bit more.
What I like to do is give the end a little bit of a twist, just to tie it all in. Now get your connector. And again, on the crimping end, 1.5. So in this half, press down and crimp. Make sure you always use one of these tools if you don't want to over crimp it. Also, one thing I like to do after I've crimped, just give it a good pull to make sure it's connected properly.
I like to add a stake to that too. Some of the tools have a little...
There you go. So you could have also done this with a ratcheted crimper like this. So obviously you pick your correct size. That's the 1.5 there. And you could crimp each side. As you can see, the wiring totally goes into connection here. And this is why it's important only to cut the right amount off. You don't want any exposed wire in this section or this section over here. Now we need to apply some heat to the shrink tubings on the side to seal it all in. Typically people use a lighter in the past, but I don't recommend doing that. So to heat shrink them properly, I'd recommend using a heat gun. Therefore you can do it a bit more evenly, safely, and not burn the plastic. So when you can clearly see through the wiring, or the connection here, you know you're done. So obviously this side looks done here, however this side needs a bit more.
Okay, so the only thing that I add to that is a lot of tools have a little divot, a little bulging piece in them that lets you stake it. It puts a little stab in that crimp and it just prevents that wire from ripping out. I'll show you where that little stake is a little bit later on. This is the kind of tool right here though that has it. Right, so let's say you're doing bare terminals. Right, the terminals that you find, factory style terminals. You'll take them, they'll be shaped like this. When you squeeze them, it barrels these over into here, and it gives you a factory style thing. So this is a crimper made for those original tools. Notice this one has the cutting area here, and it has the same holes for stripping over here, but notice the front's a little bit different because it's shaped like this. It's meant to crimp a factory connector. Right, you have these crimp splice ones, and many times we'll use these. It's like a guillotine. You put it over an existing wire. Right, this one you put over existing wire. You can put another wire in through it. You took this thing down, and it cuts through the insulation, joining the wire to that metal guillotine, transferring it to the other wire and bringing it out. So naturally, it's an easy way to grab another circuit off of it, but you risk cutting a few strands of wire, so it can do damage to the wires in the process. It is an easy way to tap in because you don't have to run a new wire. You go up to the wire, you tag off of it, and you run your thing. But that's the negative. The other negative is corrosion can get to it because it's not weather sealed. Right, this one's another one for a single one. You put that one on, it cuts through the wire the same way, and now you can put a butt connected spade into the end and join a circuit to it. So both of those things do the same type of thing. Both of them are you will use them. I use them, but just be aware that if you use them in an external area, they will corrode and eventually give you a bad connection. You also risk cutting the wire and having less strands, which what's that do? That creates a smaller wire as a result.